The first time the station said my name, I almost drove off the road. Not because it sounded threatening. That's the part I still can't explain to people properly. If the voice had sounded distorted or inhuman, or overtly sinister, I probably would have shut the radio off immediately and spent the rest of the night laughing nervously about weird AM stations during thunderstorms. Instead, it sounded calm, warm even, and by the time it finally said my name, I think part of me had already started waiting for it to. I know how insane that sounds. I really do. But if you spend enough nights alone on empty highways, eventually even static feels less lonely than silence. That's what people don't understand about loneliness. It doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it just feels repetitive. Like driving through industrial backroads at 3 a.m, delivering blood samples between hospitals, while rain smears the lights across your windshield, and the only thing speaking in the car is some radio host you've never actually seen. I think the station knew that about me long before I understood it myself. I was 39 when I started driving overnight courier routes. Officially, I worked as an independent medical transport contractor. Unofficially, I spent most nights carrying sealed containers full of blood, tissue samples, imaging drives, pathology paperwork, and other specimens from labs to places where people received terrible news: hospitals, urgent care centers, nursing homes, places full of fluorescent lighting and exhaustion. The work suited me because it didn't require much of me emotionally. Pick up the package, sign the paperwork, drive, drop off, repeat. Sometimes entire nights passed where the only conversations I had were brief exchanges at loading docks with nurses too tired to even make eye contact. I told myself I liked the independence. No boss hovering over me. No office politics. No pretending to be cheerful in some god-awful cubicle at 9 a.m. Mostly, though, I think I just stopped wanting to exist around people during normal hours. Not because I hated people. Because being around them had started making me feel invisible in a way that was hard to explain. My parents had both died within 2 years of each other. My father first. My mother about 16 months later. I was their only child, which meant that after the estate paperwork and funeral arrangements ended, there was really nobody left who remembered me before adulthood. I didn't realize how much that would hollow a person out. Then, Daniel left. Not dramatically. No screaming. No betrayal. No spectacular collapse, which somehow made it worse. He just slowly stopped loving me. That's the ugliest kind of heartbreak, because there's nothing concrete to fight against. No villain, no explosion, just gradual emotional erosion, until one day, the person beside you looks exhausted by your presence. Near the end, he started speaking to me carefully, like someone trying not to startle an injured animal. Eventually, he admitted he thought he wanted more from life. More excitement. More possibility. More connection. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, while we stood in our kitchen listening to the dishwasher hum softly in the background, he told me he just didn't think he was in love with me anymore. I remember nodding like we were discussing finances. I remember asking practical questions. Who would keep the apartment? When he planned to move? Whether he wanted the couch? He said he was taking the dog. He had him since before we met, so Charlie was his. That part still hurts more than I can justify. After he left, the apartment changed immediately. The silence became different. No nails clicking against hardwood floors. No tags jingling softly near the front door. No weight shifting beside the couch at night. For months afterward, I still occasionally heard phantom sounds that weren't there. The imagined rhythm of paws crossing the hallway. The creak of the leash hook near the door. Not ghosts, just absence replaying itself. That was my life before the station. Quiet apartment. Night roads. Hospital corridors. Rain. Always rain. Somehow. The first time I heard the signal, I was driving between a lab in Edison and a hospital outside Patterson during a storm bad enough to blur the lane markers. It was sometime after 2 a.m. The roads were almost empty except for trucks. I remember scanning stations absent-mindedly because the silence inside the car had started feeling oppressive. My phone was dying, so I didn't want to waste battery playing music. Most FM stations dissolved into static because of the weather. Then somewhere near an industrial stretch of highway, lined with power lines and dead warehouses, the AM band caught something faint beneath interference. A voice, not a station introduction, not music, just a man speaking calmly as though continuing a conversation already in progress. "You sound tired tonight," came through my car speakers. I remember freezing with my hand still on the dial. The voice didn't sound artificial. It sounded intimate, like someone sitting in the passenger seat speaking gently into the dark. Rain hammered the windshield, while static hissed softly underneath his words. The station display read, 1170 AM. No call letters. No advertisements. No music. Just that voice. He continued speaking quietly about exhaustion, about people who stayed awake too late because nighttime felt emotionally easier than daylight, about the strange loneliness of driving long distances with nobody waiting for you at the end of the route. I remember feeling an almost physical chill when he mentioned empty apartments specifically. It felt too accurate and hit a little too close to home. The signal faded as I approached the hospital. By the time I parked near the receiving dock, the voice had disappeared entirely beneath static. The strange thing is, I spent the entire delivery thinking about it afterward. Not fearfully, curiously. That's important. People always imagine horror begins with terror. Most of the time, it begins with recognition. The station appeared again 3 nights later, then again the following week. Always late, always during storms or stretches of isolated highway, always on AM. The voice never introduced himself, never brought on callers, never even fully sounded like he was broadcasting to an audience. He spoke in these long, thoughtful stretches about insomnia and grief and emotional exhaustion, while static breathed softly underneath his words. Sometimes entire minutes passed, where he said almost nothing at all, and somehow those silences felt comforting instead of awkward. Like he understood that tired people don't always need conversation. Sometimes they just need another presence somewhere in the dark. That's what the station became for me initially. Presence. I started looking for it during long drives between facilities. The signal seemed strongest outside populated areas. Industrial access roads, rural highways, and dead stretches between transmission towers. Sometimes it disappeared entirely for days. But other nights, it came through so clearly it sounded like the voice was sitting inside the car with me. The host gradually became more personal, too. Small things first, Comments about overnight workers living on vending machine coffee and gas station food. Remarks about people sleeping on couches instead of bedrooms after breakups. Observations about how grief changes the sound of a home. One night, while driving through heavy fog outside Trenton, he mentioned how difficult it could be to stop reaching toward the opposite side of the bed after someone leaves. I nearly pulled over, because I had done exactly that earlier that morning, after finally falling asleep on the couch around sunrise. That was the first time I shut the station off intentionally. Not from fear, exactly. From exposure. The intimacy of it unsettled me. It felt like the station had somehow reached inside private spaces I never spoke about aloud. I avoided the frequency for nearly a week afterward. And during that week, I realized how much emotional space the broadcasts had already occupied inside my life. The roads felt emptier without the voice. The drives felt longer, more mechanical. I caught myself scanning the AM band repeatedly during deliveries without meaning to. That disturbed me more than the station itself, because it meant I missed it. The next time the signal returned, I was driving through heavy rain near Elizabeth sometime after 3 a.m. The moment the voice emerged through static, he said softly, "We were beginning to worry about you." I actually had to pull into a rest stop after that, because my hands started shaking. Not entirely from fear. Part of me felt relieved. That's the embarrassing truth. Relieved. Because by then the station had started filling emotional space I didn't fully realize existed. The voice became routine after that. Coffee before midnight. Pickup routes. Empty highways. The station somewhere after 1:30. I began structuring nights around it unconsciously, driving slower when the signal became clear, taking longer routes home, lingering in parking lots after deliveries just to keep listening. The station never sounded threatening. I guess that's what made it dangerous. The host spoke about loneliness the way some people speak about chronic pain, patiently, without judgment. He described exhaustion as something cumulative, a weight people carried quietly until eventually they forgot what it felt like not to be tired. Sometimes while driving alone at night, listening to rain hit the roof of the car, while his voice moved softly beneath static, I felt more emotionally understood than I had in years. That realization terrified me, because the station was becoming more emotionally important than actual people, and somehow I still didn't stop listening. The first time the host said my name happened in January. I'd just completed a late pathology transfer from a nursing home outside Morristown. Snow mixed with freezing rain across the windshield, while I drove through nearly empty back roads toward another pickup. The station had been quiet most of the night, mostly static. Then suddenly the signal sharpened, and the host said, "You should pull over for a few minutes, Claire. You're having trouble concentrating tonight." I remember my entire body going cold, not dramatic horror movie cold. Worse, that numb internal feeling when reality stops behaving correctly. I pulled onto the shoulder without fully realizing I was doing it. The voice continued calmly, talking about exhaustion and how people often drove dangerously when emotionally distracted. I sat there gripping the steering wheel while snow hissed softly against the windshield. And then he mentioned the dog. Not directly, just a passing comment about how some losses continue moving through empty homes long after they're gone. I shut the radio off so hard, I nearly broke the dial. For several minutes, I just sat there breathing, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd said my name aloud during calls earlier. Maybe the station used generalized psychological tricks. Maybe exhaustion was distorting my perception. Maybe I just misheard. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The station wasn't guessing. It knew me. After that night, I started researching the frequency obsessively. At first, I found almost nothing. No registered station matching the signal. No FCC listings. No archived broadcasts. Eventually, buried beneath dead forum links and abandoned radio hobbyist boards, I found references going back decades. Scattered fragments. A deleted thread from 2011 describing a late-night station that sounds like someone talking directly to you. A scanned newspaper clipping about a missing truck driver whose rig was found idling beside a decommissioned relay station in Nebraska. An archived FCC complaint describing unexplained AM interference during storms across multiple states. Most disturbing of all were the abandoned vehicle reports. Again and again, I found references to empty cars discovered near old communication infrastructure, relay towers, emergency broadcast facilities, abandoned transmitter stations, isolated utility roads. The descriptions repeated almost identically. Keys still in ignition, headlights on, radio emitting static and no signs of struggle, like people had simply stepped out of their lives voluntarily. Then, I found the police report. An officer responding to an abandoned sedan near an old transmission field outside Ohio reported hearing nothing but static from the vehicle radio. But a second officer on site claimed he heard a calm male voice, discussing weather conditions and referring to him personally. That officer disappeared 11 days later. His patrol car was eventually discovered beside another relay structure, nearly 70 miles away. Radio still on. I should have stopped listening after that. Instead, the station became real. And once something becomes real, it becomes harder to turn away from. The host grew more intimate over time. Still gentle. Still patient. But increasingly possessive. He spoke often about how exhausting modern life had become, how disconnected people were from themselves, how some listeners stayed awake because nighttime felt emotionally safer than daylight. The terrifying part was that I agreed with him. The station made ordinary life start feeling unbearably loud afterward. Conversations exhausted me. Traffic overwhelmed me. Even grocery stores began feeling emotionally abrasive somehow. Meanwhile, the station felt calm, focused, understanding. I started avoiding friends, not intentionally. Human interactions simply began feeling less meaningful than those quiet drives alone at night, with the radio murmuring softly through static. The host encouraged movement subtly. Never commands, suggestions, remarks about how signals traveled more clearly, away from crowded places, how roads became emotionally honest after midnight, how some listeners found peace in quiet locations far from cities. And gradually, without consciously deciding to, I began driving farther. Longer routes, detours, aimless stretches through industrial backroads after deliveries ended. The signal always strengthened the farther I got from populated areas, especially near old infrastructure, transmission towers, utility roads, abandoned communications facilities. Once, during a freezing rainstorm near the Pennsylvania border, I followed the signal to a fenced-off relay station, half buried in weeds. There were already cars parked nearby. 3 of them. All 3 were empty, with the headlights off and dark windows. No visible movement. All facing the tower. I remember sitting there listening to static hiss softly through my speakers, while the host talked quietly about rest. Not sleep. Rest. And for the first time, I understood something terrible. The station didn't prey on lonely people randomly. It found people already drifting away from ordinary life emotionally. People whose loneliness had made them permeable somehow. Open frequencies. After that night, reality started warping around the edges. I began losing time. Sometimes entire drives vanished from memory. I'd arrive at destinations without recalling portions of the route. Once I woke parked outside a closed, urgent care facility, nearly 40 minutes from my apartment, with the radio already playing softly. The station also started appearing beneath other sounds, very faintly. Fragments of the host's cadence beneath hold music, suggestions of his voice hidden inside static bursts, certain electrical hums beginning to resemble speech. Not hallucinations exactly, more like anticipation reshaping sound. And through all of it, the station remained comforting. That's the part that still horrifies me most. Even after I became frightened, even after I understood something predatory was happening, the station still felt emotionally safe. Safer than people. The host never ignored me, never withdrew affection, never became disappointed in me, never lost interest. He was simply always there, waiting. A few weeks ago, the signal disappeared entirely. No broadcasts, no static, nothing. And instead of relief, I felt panic so severe it became physical. I barely slept. I kept scanning frequencies compulsively during deliveries, like someone waiting for a call from a dying relative. That was when I finally understood what the station had done to me. It hadn't frightened me into isolation. It had comforted me into it. The signal returned 3 nights later during a thunderstorm, stronger than ever. The host sounded almost relieved. He spoke quietly for over an hour while I drove through rain-soaked highways, carrying pathology specimens toward a hospital outside Camden. He talked about exhaustion, about loneliness, about how difficult it becomes to continue participating in lives that stopped loving you back years earlier. And somewhere during that drive, I realized something devastating. I didn't want to resist anymore, because the station had become the only thing left in my life that consistently noticed whether I existed. I know how horrifying that sounds. But if you've been lonely long enough, being recognized starts feeling dangerously close to being loved. It's raining again tonight. Hard enough that visibility keeps disappearing beneath sheets of water across the windshield. I'm parked right now beside another relay site somewhere west of the city. The station led me here gradually over the past few hours, through stretches of empty road and dead industrial corridors, where the signal kept growing stronger. I can see the towers ahead through the rain, dark against the sky. The radio beside me is mostly static now, but underneath it, faintly, I can still hear his voice, patient as ever, telling me how tired I've been for so long, telling me I don't have to carry it anymore. And the frightening thing is, I believe him. I think later tomorrow or the next day, whenever the police eventually find my car here, they'll document it exactly the same way they documented all the others. Vehicle abandoned. Keys still in ignition. No signs of struggle. Radio softly emitting static. Maybe one officer will hear nothing unusual. Maybe another will hear a calm, familiar voice speaking gently through the speakers. And maybe eventually that officer will start staying awake later too. Maybe they'll begin taking long drives at night. Maybe they'll start realizing how unbearable silence feels once everyone else goes to sleep. I still don't know what the station really is. I don't know where the listeners go. But I think I finally understand why nobody fights it in the end. Because after a certain kind of loneliness, being found feels like mercy.
If this one got under your skin, there are more waiting. Subscribe to the leather-bound grimoire